you can control your contributions to a relationship. And I think that's what I resolved to do when I came back from my trip, that I want to make sure that I do everything I can. I open myself, work on the things that I found difficult, and I stop avoiding these difficult things as well. At the end of the day, that's not going to be enough because, yeah, you always have two parts. But when you ask, what did you get out of that? I'm very glad that I did all of these things and I did the therapy for myself and that I put all of the effort in that I did, because I think that helped me to get to a point where eventually I could make that decision and have peace with it.
Welcome to International Love Story, the podcast about intercultural relationships. My name is Christina, and in today's podcast episode, I'm going to welcome Anna. Anna is living in Great Britain at the moment, but she's originally from the Netherlands. And the story she's going to tell us today is quite different to the stories I usually host here, because this is a breakup story. But I think that's a story Anna can tell much better than I would possibly be able to do. So let's give a warm welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I can't wait to get to know you, to get to know your story. And yeah, with this being said, let's just go directly into it. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Anna. Who are you? What are you doing? Tell us all about you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for the introduction and for having me on the podcast today. Yes, so my name is Anna. I am originally from the Netherlands. I currently work for a humanitarian NGO and I have a remote job. I am living in the UK. Currently living in a city called Norwich, and I moved to the UK in 2017, so that's coming up to 7 years ago.
You to the UK?
So I moved to the UK for love, as I think probably a lot of your guests' common theme in the podcast. Yeah, so I was 21, and in 2016, I was studying for my undergrad at a Dutch university, but I was doing an exchange semester in Japan. So I was living in Japan for 6 months. And this is where I met my partner to be at the time on a dating app, actually, because he was from the UK, he was living in London, and he was also in Japan at the time. So we matched on a dating app while we were both there. And then we spent the next 3 months talking, just chatting, getting to know each other over WhatsApp mostly, and building a bit of a connection like that. About 3 months later, I was moving back home to the Netherlands to finish my degree. And that's when he flew to Amsterdam so that we met in person for the first time. We had a first real date. Actually, the beginning, maybe the first couple of hours, it was incredibly awkward. It didn't start very well. And I think we were both thinking, oh, what am I actually doing? Like, I'm here with this stranger that I only know from WhatsApp. What have I done making this guy come all the way over here? But then it turned out pretty nicely. And we started dating from there on. So I was living in the Netherlands. He was living in London. And think about 6 months in, I had now finished up my undergraduate degree. I didn't really have plans yet for what I wanted to do next necessarily. I didn't have a job lined up. I also didn't really know what I wanted to do work-wise or in my life. Well, my boyfriend was living in London, so it seemed quite natural that it was a good time for me to also move to London. So yeah, that's what I did in September 2017. We were together for about 6 months, I think. And decided to move to London quite spontaneously. Didn't really have it completely planned out. I would say I was also quite lucky in a sense because at the time it was still really easy to move between other EU countries and the UK. This was a year after the Brexit referendum, but it was before Brexit had gone into effect. So I didn't need a complicated visa or anything like that, the borders were still open. And it's not that far away, obviously. It's, I think, 300, 400 kilometers. And it's a country where I already spoke the language. I studied in English as well, so I was relatively comfortable speaking that. So there were a lot of things working in my favor. I think if I listen to some of the other podcast episodes of couples that you interview, they must be thinking, oh, what are you even talking about? It's basically next door. You speak the language. You don't even have to go through the complicated visa application. So I was lucky in a lot of ways to be able to do that, to move to a different country for love and have relatively few of those practical logistical hurdles. But I think at the same time, that makes it quite easy to underestimate a move like that as well. Because, yeah, it is relatively close. So for me, most of the time, except for during the pandemic, it's probably a lot easier to go back sometimes and visit my family. Again, it's not that far away compared to people who move to a different continent, for example. And for me, getting integrated in the United Kingdom, there wasn't that much of a language barrier. But at the same time, even if it's not that far, there's still a sea in between. It's still, I would say, very different from just moving to a different city in your country. It's, yeah, you can't just thrive that easily or go over that easily. And one thing I probably underestimated a little bit is that British and Dutch have very different cultures, even though they're technically neighbors. So, yeah, as I said earlier in that year or the year before, I'd spent some time in Japan, and I think you go into it expecting a bit of a culture shock. And I had also studied Japan, so I did a lot of that, maybe prep work of mentally preparing myself like that. And this is not really something that I gave much thought when I moved to the UK. Maybe also, again, because the logistics of it was quite easy. I didn't really do that much prep at all. I didn't give it that much thought in a way. So, yeah, then some things can come as a bit of a shock that actually the culture is really different. You can walk into some clashes or situations where you do slightly the wrong thing or you say the wrong thing. There can be misunderstandings, and you have to do a lot of adapting, integrating into the culture of your partner that I hadn't really considered beforehand. And we also hadn't really sat down or discussed it. We hadn't really talked about it as an element in our relationship. Like, we have an intercultural relationship and we need to maybe keep that in mind, or we need to talk about some of these differences and make sure we understand each other. Yeah, we didn't really consider that. And I personally didn't really think about that very much when I made the move.
First of all, I don't think, I mean, yes, a lot of couples I interview, they come from different ends of the world, but I don't think that there's no impact when it comes to different cultures. So what you've just mentioned, that there's still such thing as a culture shock, even though if Great Britain, the UK is the neighbor of the Netherlands, yes, you could just easily get a plane or get into a plane and fly back home if things are too much for you to handle. But obviously you wanted to make the UK home as well and figure it out while being in the relationship. For example, I have a friend, she's from Germany and her husband is from Austria. And even there we do have cultural differences, even if the cultures are quite similar. But that's always an aspect you should never underestimate. And that's an intercultural relationship as well, even though if Austria is the neighbor country to Germany. So in the end, I feel like what you've just mentioned, being aware that cultural shock will hit you, doesn't make a difference if it's just a neighbor country, because you do have to adjust to so many new circumstances and especially a different culture. So speaking about that, because you've mentioned that it was the culture when moving to the UK of your ex-partner now, but I also know that he has culture-wise different influences as well. And that's something you've mentioned in the little pre-talk, that he's a third cultural kid. Did that impact your relationship as well and your life in the UK together, or how was that for you?
Yeah, I would say that will definitely have impacted our relationship as well, because he is already a very intercultural person in that sense. So you will also take that into a relationship. And I think there are a lot of particularities and sometimes challenges, also a lot of really beautiful opportunities as well, being a third culture kid. I'm not a third culture kid myself. I'm just from the Netherlands, so I can't speak too much on what that experience is like, but I think you bring that into a relationship. In our case, he grew up in London, so he was very British, but at the same time, he also wasn't born in the UK. And for actually largest part of our relationship, when I had moved to the UK, we didn't live together for 3 years. The first 3 years in the UK, I was renting rooms in different house shares, and he was living with his family, who also live in London, which in London is quite common, if that opportunity to do that, because it's such an expensive city. So that's a way in your early career to save some money. And so, yeah, for him, I think there's basically, you also have a intercultural relationship with your family, right? It's a different kind of relationship. So that's something that I witness as well in their interactions, in my interactions with them. And I don't want to speak too much on his behalf on what that would have been like for him to maybe have some of those cultural clashes with the other generation that didn't grow up here. But I think you always take that into a romantic relationship as well. Although I would say in the beginning, I didn't feel like that played a particular role in our relationship. But then again, at the same time, I mentioned before that even us being in an intercultural relationship, I wasn't very conscious of that in the beginning either. So I think that's more something that now and maybe towards the end, I was reflecting more on, and I was thinking about how that adds an extra layer. But it was quite difficult. I mean, that's probably going to be a theme in this episode. It was quite difficult for us to communicate about that and share our feelings about that. So I can still not with certainty say, or this is how that was for him, or this is what he brought into our relationship.
Yeah, I would like to focus on your story, your perspective. What I'd be mostly interested in is about how you've handled the whole moving abroad, culture shock in the UK, making friends, moving in together with them, because you've just mentioned that you didn't live together for 3 years and then you moved in together. So you were dating for 3 years, your place, his place. You really got to know each other, I guess, during that period of time as well, because out of experience, I know it's a huge difference between meeting someone online and texting and having those video calls, and then meeting this person in person, building a life and trying to make it work somehow. So when it comes to trying to make it work somehow, you've mentioned there were some hurdles in terms of communication. For example, how was that part for you in the beginning?
Absolutely. I can speak a bit to the experience of moving and navigating that and us living apart. I think that was partly practical reasons. For him, it worked quite well to be able to still stay with family. London is a very expensive city. I was renting rooms in house shares, and that's what I could afford. I don't think we would have been able to afford renting an apartment together. So partly practical, but then at the same time, that's what I wanted as well at the time, because I think I did realize, well, we're quite young. I'm quite young. I was 21 at the time. We'd been in a relationship for 6 months, but long distance. So it's still very new. And I think for me, that felt natural and right to first be in a house share and navigate, trying to get settled a bit and build some things for myself in this new country, and us, visiting each other instead of directly moving in together that soon. So practical, but also that's what I wanted at the time too. And so when I moved, like I said before, I didn't really have very much planned. It's something I'd been thinking about throughout the summer, but in the end, it was still quite spontaneous, I would say. And when I came, I just arranged via someone that I knew that I could rent a very affordable room in the very outskirts of London with a live-in landlord. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't really have any plan of what I was going to do, how I was going to make a living here. I didn't have any friends yet, of course. So quite starting with zero, just a boyfriend and a place to live. And I think the first couple of months, definitely the first 6 months, were quite difficult. Try and acclimatize to build up a life for yourself from really nothing. But I think that's something that I've thought about quite a lot, especially looking back. I realized actually how hard it was. And I think when I was going through it at the time, I didn't really allow those feelings to really come to the surface. So I really had a really positive sort of, let's just do this kind of approach. And let's just get on with it. And I didn't really let myself feel, I think, how hard it was. And actually looking back at the first couple of months, I suddenly felt, I was really struggling. I was not happy at that point in time at all. But I think some of the things that I maybe struggled with the most was not having friends. And because I didn't have a job yet, I didn't really know what I was going to do. You don't really feel like you have a purpose. The days get very long. At the same time, it takes a lot of energy to try and get used to a new country. You have to set up all of these new processes and things for yourself. It's kind of like you have to relearn all of these things that you don't have to give a second thought when you're in an environment that you know. Even taking a trip to the grocery store or any of the things that you need, you have to look up, how does this work here? There's so many administrative and sort of bureaucracy things that you need to sort out. So that takes a lot of your energy. But then at the same time, there wasn't much that was filling that energy back up. Because when it comes to energy levels and interaction, I think I am an extrovert by nature when it comes down to it. So I get energy from spending time with other people and making connections. But this was quite difficult in the beginning. I think the first months were really difficult. Then the time afterwards, I had a better time in London. In the end, I lived in London for 5 years, but it never truly got to feel like home for me. I think maybe at the end of the day, London and I were not the best match because it's such a big city. And despite there being so many people, it can feel really individual. It doesn't come that natural to make connections with people. You really have to put in a lot of effort to try and make connections with people. Yeah, and it feels like quite an individual city to me. So I think those were some of the things that I struggled with. Yeah, in the end, I found some different jobs. I started first working part-time in a restaurant, and eventually I found a full-time office job for myself on wage. About a year after I arrived, I decided to study for my master's degree in the UK. I also ended up moving house very often. So I was in the first rented room with my live-in landlord for about 6 months. And then I moved into a different house sharing with 3 other people, slightly closer into central London. So it was a bit easier to go into the city and be in the actual exciting part of London. And then in the end, it was always for a different reason, but none of my housing situation was always a bit unstable. So I never ended up staying in the same place for a long time. I moved house very often. I think on average, probably every 6 months. I think
Crazy.
I had about maybe 8 different places in that time. And I think that doesn't really help to lay down roots. So I think that also played a part in why I was struggling a little bit, even when I felt happier and I felt like I understood life in the UK, life in London better. I know what to do. I feel a bit more integrated. It still never really felt like home. And yeah, it probably doesn't help if you constantly move house, you're constantly in a new environment like that. So those were some of the things that I found difficult in the beginning, moving to a new country for our relationship. Yeah, so we, for the most part, the first 3 years of me being in the UK, we weren't living together, but we're visiting, we're seeing each other. I'm becoming friends with his friends, which is nice because now I have some friends in the UK as well. And obviously we get to know each other better that way.
That you were slowly adjusting?
Yeah. I was saying that, I was moving house a lot. I was getting a bit more integrated. Oh, yeah, I think I know. Yeah. So I was saying that I felt a bit better in London. I felt like I understood the country more. You know, you get a bit of a routine going. I had my work, I had my studies at some point. I had my different house shares and now I had some friends as well. But yeah, I think for our relationship, it was difficult that, like I said in the beginning, we didn't go into this intercultural relationship and we didn't go into this arrangement where I had moved to the UK very consciously. So we never really sat down and talked about, okay, what does that mean for us? How can we make sure we understand each other? Make sure we keep communicating about that. That was not really a conversation that we had. And so I think what ended up happening from my perspective is that I was a person that moved to that country. You know, there's, to some extent, I think, always going to be a little bit of an imbalance when you're dealing with two different cultures because I'm in this country. So naturally, I'm going to have to integrate in that society in the way that things work here. So you maybe have to work a little bit harder because I need to fit into this society and live in this society. In addition to that, I think it's also a tendency that I have, and probably this is also part of my personality to some extent as well, is that I have a tendency to go with the flow to quite an extreme extent, maybe I would say. So I have a tendency to really accommodate and I'm really flexible. So I will quite easily adopt, oh, this is what someone else is doing. This is the way that they do things. This is what I think is expected of me. And maybe sometimes I do that too much. So I get a little bit passive and I go, very much with the flow and with what other people are expecting of me. So I think slowly but surely over the years, something that I wasn't very conscious of in the beginning is I really felt like I was doing all of this accommodating. I had to change a lot to make this work. And without really realizing it, I had arranged my whole life around this other person. So, you know, I had made that move, but also every time I moved house into a different house share, I had to think about, okay, well, he's in this part of London. I need to be in this part of London. Otherwise, we can't really visit each other. It needs to have XYZ in order for him to be able to visit me. And consequently, you know, the decision for where I was going to study, there were a lot of things working against the UK, mostly the very, very high tuition fees. But I was thinking, well, I'm in this relationship. I want to make this work. It's important for me to be here. So all of my big life decisions, also the jobs that I took after my degree as well, because I studied international relations and I'm in a very international field where it's quite common for people to move around a bit or get work experience in different areas of the world or in different countries. But again, I wanted to take the job where I was going to be able to stay here because, you know, I want to make this relationship work. All of these big life decisions I had shaped around the relationship and around another person. And I think it took me a really long time to have a realization of I've just really slotted myself into someone else's life, basically. And I've given up a lot of my agency. And just to be clear, I'm the only person that I'm holding accountable for that because that's something that I choose to do. That's the tendency that I have. But I think when I realized that, it hit quite hard that this is maybe not the best way for me to live. And there are a lot of needs and feelings that I haven't allowed myself to surface or express. There are a lot of needs that I have abandoned. And I think this was maybe the hardest part for me in our relationship, and the struggle with moving abroad for love and kind of giving up control.
As I understand, you were bending yourself in different direction depending on what was needed at that very moment. Did you lose yourself during that process as well? To summarize it in a way?
Yeah, I would really say so. I think towards the end of our relationship, that's something that I finally acknowledged to myself and finally realized that I had really lost myself, and I was really out of touch with what I wanted in life and with what my needs were, partly because of the practical reasons. So I've moved to a country and I've sort of accommodated my life around this, and partly because I think those are some tendencies or personality that I have, is that in a relationship I have a tendency to go with the flow, go with what someone else is doing. If something's not really working for me, I prefer to avoid the conflict. So I'm just going to push it down a little bit and be very flexible. And so, yeah, I think it's like you say, I really lost myself in that process.
What was the moment you realized that? Was it like different little things that were coming together that basically boiled the pot, or was there a specific moment that you were able to somehow see that crystal clear that this is not what you want anymore?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it was quite a gradual process that really happened during the pandemic, I would say. And I still don't know, was that very heavily influenced by the circumstances of the pandemic, or it's also partly, you are a few years older and those are things that you come to see a bit more clearly or realize about yourself at that age. But it was during the pandemic where obviously a lot of things changed. During the pandemic is also when we first started living together as well, almost out of necessity because we wouldn't have been able to see each other at all. But then it did also feel like the right time and something we wanted to do. And obviously life came to a halt. The lockdowns in the UK were really strict. I never want to complain too much about the pandemic because it's something everyone went through. And I was really lucky in the sense that none of my family members got very ill or anything like that. But I did struggle during this time because I think a city like London, where everyone lives in very small, very, very small rooms, not a lot of outdoor space, it's not really the nicest place to be during a pandemic with the really strong lockdown rules. So everything really came to a halt. You stop seeing friends for a year and a half or longer. Your life becomes a bit smaller in that sense. There are fewer distractions. And so I do think this is what started my process of suddenly turning inwards. There are no distractions anymore. And I started to do a lot of reflecting, I think, on myself, on some of my tendencies and some of our dynamic in the relationship as well. And it was a very gradual process. I think in the end, it took me a very long time to acknowledge that I wasn't happy in that relationship and that I had put myself in a situation that wasn't really serving me. And it still took a long time. I think it was pretty much after the pandemic in 2022 when I went on a solo holiday, which initially was meant to be us going together, but then due to circumstances, he wasn't able to join. I ended up going alone. And I had such an amazing time on this trip. And I felt so free and I felt so happy that I was out of this lockdown. I was into the world again. And I was really elated. And then I think we ran into a bit of a clash whilst I was away, where we had an argument about, we're basically not on the same page of what a long-term relationship should entail or what it shouldn't entail. And when it comes to doing holidays alone or what our priority should be. And I think this is the moment where I came out of that lockdown and was alone and away for a little bit. That, I had a sort of key moments where I finally acknowledged to myself, this really isn't working. I need to do something right now because I'm not happy. And so I came back and I really told myself, okay, I'm not happy. I don't think our relationship is on the right track. I don't think the way that it is right now is working. But I feel like I haven't worked on it yet. I haven't really done anything to make that better because I've been avoiding. I think we need to have these conversations about the future and about what we want and about our priorities. I haven't voiced my needs or when something's bothering me, I try to make it a better relationship. So that was my resolution, to do things completely differently and to not avoid the difficult subjects anymore and to really work on it. And then, we had a couple months where I think we did exactly that. And it was also a period for me where when that wasn't really working initially, I then started feeling quite lost because I didn't really know what to do anymore. I really wanted to know, what is the right decision? Like, what should I do? Are we going to make this work or are we not going to make this work? And I felt like there must be a right answer out there that I need to find, or someone needs to give me this advice. This is what you need to do. And I felt like I just couldn't grasp it. I couldn't get to it. So I started throwing lots of different things at the problem. But when the talking and the communication didn't really work, I thought maybe we can try some couples counseling, which we didn't do in the end because it was quite far out of my partner's comfort zone. I thought, well, then I'll take individual therapy because I feel like I have some behaviors that I can probably work on. I tried group coaching, like women's group coaching sessions. I start following all of these social media accounts about relationship advice and reading about these constructive dialogue tips and strategies. I did a tarot reading at one point, or like a pendulum that you can ask questions. I was like, something needs to give me the answer. So I was just trying everything.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Absolutely, yes. Because I felt so anxious about the decision. I was like, but I don't know. And I think that was related to how I really wasn't in touch with what I wanted. Maybe partly because I'm a person that's kind of on the fence and doesn't really like to make decisions, but also because I felt like I had outsourced a lot of the big questions. I had arranged my life around, so I had kind of outsourced, okay, what is the thing that I want? I didn't know what I wanted anymore. And so I felt like I cannot make this decision. So I think I was definitely avoiding that. And I think eventually, as quite some time passed, I had to eventually face that no one is going to tell you what to do. There also isn't necessarily a right and a wrong decision. You just have to do what you think is best with the information and the feeling that you have. You can take one road, you can take a different road, but there's no right or wrong that you can find. You just have to take it and create it yourself. But it took quite a long time to get there.
Because a lot of those things you're just sharing, they resonate with me. I'm the type of person that's avoiding conflict as well, quite often.
Right.
Where I have to remind myself, okay, open communication. I'm also in a position where I found a way to communicate very well. It took a while, but now we got to, after 8 years, where we got to a point where we really know each other, and also where he's pushing me to be more open about my feelings and about my thoughts. So a lot of those things you're sharing with me or with us right now are resonating a lot, honestly. I would just like to add to this, because that's part of the story, I guess, as well. And that's what I hear in between the lines. You were trying to find a solution. You were trying to make it work. I understand that couples therapy or counseling is not for everyone. I totally respect that. But what did you get back out of your perspective and in return for all the work, for all the effort you put in? Because in the end, it's always two parts that are involved in a relationship and that are working on it. And if you don't get this something in return, it will even just be more frustrating. So how was that for you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, as you say it, Tina, because, yeah, you can control your contributions to a relationship. And I think that's what I resolved to do when I came back from my trip, that I want to make sure that I do everything I can. I open myself, work on the things that I found difficult, and I stop avoiding these difficult things as well. At the end of the day, that's not going to be enough because, yeah, you always have two parts. But when you ask, what did you get out of that? I'm very glad that I did all of these things and I did the therapy for myself and that I put all of the effort in that I did, because I think that helped me to get to a point where eventually I could make that decision and have peace with it. Because if during the trip I would have walked away from that relationship, I feel like it would always be unsatisfying. Yeah, that I wouldn't know, well, what would have happened if I really tried everything. I tried everything that I could. So, yeah, in the end, I wouldn't change any part of that. And I think that led me to the point where I did see, actually, right now, I don't think I can get anything out of this anymore. And I do make the decision to leave that relationship. And it was quite a revelation for me when that happened, when it took me a really long time to get to that point, and I had felt so much anxiety about it, constantly not knowing what to do, going from what is the right thing to do, but what if it's the wrong decision? What if I'm going to regret it? What if I want someone to give me the answer because I feel like I don't have it and I don't know what I want. That's going on for a quite a long period of time, really exhausting and anxiety inducing. I had so much stress in my body and this was always playing on my mind. And then always worrying, well, what if I leave and it's wrong and I regret it or it's a mistake? And then when that happened and I did, it was a relief in a sense. It was amazing to me to see that even if a breakup is really hard and the time that follows is sad and is painful and is difficult, there wasn't even one moment where I actually thought, oh, maybe I've made a mistake. It was so clear to me when I finally did that. I really didn't look back. So it was really amazing to me, something that I had worried about for so long. Actually, I didn't even question anymore. Oh, was it maybe a mistake? Or it was very clear. It was quite hard. It was a difficult process, but in the end, I think that's what I needed to do. That's what I needed to experience and go through to get to that point of being at peace, being able to leave that relationship and feeling at peace with it and truly feeling this is what's right for me right now.
Was there some sort of relief as well after you spoke it out?
Yeah, well, maybe not immediately, because the breakup itself is a very painful, very sad thing to go through. So there were a lot of feelings of guilt, of being very, very sad about the idea of hurting someone else. But I think in the period that followed, there was definitely relief, because all of that tension, all of that anxiety, all of that stress that had been so hard, and that was gone. I didn't worry about where to go, whether to make that decision, what decision to make anymore. That was such a relief, I think, for my whole being.
And how long was the process between you realizing that you're not happy or that you wish for something else, for something more, feeling all those feelings, having all those thoughts, to the point where you communicated your decision?
So I think from the moment where I acknowledged first to myself, okay, this isn't working, I'm going to do things differently, I'm going to really work for it. And then me leaving that relationship definitively, that was nearly a year, I think, 10 months probably.
Can be a long period of time.
Yeah, it's quite a long period of uncertainty and all of these conflicting emotions and stress on your mind constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I think almost everyone who's listening and or watching right now knows how a breakup feels like. It's definitely not a good feeling, and feeling all the sadness afterwards, some sort of void as well in a way. So you're depending on how your relationship was before, but most likely you're falling into a deep hole first and not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel until you finally realize that you made the right decision. And as you've mentioned, Anna, in the end, it's not wrong or right. Also,
Exactly.
you moving to the UK, that's something I would like to mention here and point out again. I mean, yes, you left the Netherlands. Yes, like professional wise, you could be somewhere else, or you could have traveled the world or do different jobs. Maybe you would have started your master instead somewhere else instead of the UK. But all of those are just ifs. And in the moment you've made the decision you made felt right. So for you, in the moment you made it, it was the right decision to make. And also going through all those experiences and just a short amount of time brought you where you are nowadays. And I don't think that's something you would like to miss, because you've learned so much about yourself in a very short period of time, where you want to be who you want to be with everything you've learned. You're more clear about the way you communicate and also communicating your wishes, because I think that's a long road to really go straight into a conflict and find the right words at that very moment as well. That's at least this is what I'm working on right now. So speaking out of experience, but you know that this is the way to go, and that you are still focusing on this, because only by going straight into a conflict in a way that's proper, not lightheaded or very emotionally, but in a way that's proper, and you'll be able to communicate what you want and also get what you want, because you're moving into that direction. You'll be led by other people making a decision for you, or making a decision based on what you think they expect from you. And that way you kind of give up control. And I think, also speaking out of my own experience, definitely something no one should go through. But if you've been through this, it definitely prepares you for so much more that's going to come, and that life is throwing at you. And I think you also get much more relaxed in so many situations where you might have overreacted or reacted differently before going through this experience. Again, talking a lot out of my own experience here as well. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Tina, 100%. And that's actually something I really want to emphasize here as well, because I know there's really nice podcasts and content about all of these intercultural couples that have a really nice story together, and probably have a lot of challenges that they're overcoming together. And obviously, in my story, the ending is a little bit difficult, but I really don't want people to see this as a negative story, because that's not how I feel about it at all. Just because in the intercultural relationship, or any relationship for that matter, in the end, it doesn't work out and you separate, it doesn't mean that it's a failed relationship, because we have shared so many beautiful things together. I have so many good memories, and I've learned so much from everything. And, you know, despite me saying the way that I went into this, I think I gave up quite a lot of control. I gave up quite a lot of agency by the tendencies that I had. If I would find myself in a similar situation, the person that I am right now, I would do a lot of the things differently. But actually, it doesn't mean that I regret anything that has happened, actually, anything. And I wouldn't change any part of it. I would never say that I regret moving to the United Kingdom and the difficult periods that we had, the difficult time at the end. I wouldn't change any part of that as well, because I think, like you were saying, you do what you think is best at the time, the information and the wisdom that you have. I think it's amazing to take a chance on love and do it and go for it. And I got so much out of that. I've learned so much from that. So I hope that's not a cautionary tale or like a scary story to anyone who's listening, that, this is how it can go, because I wouldn't change any of it. And I could never say that I would regret making this move or I would regret any part of that journey, because, that's what made me who I am today. And if I didn't move to the UK, I don't know where I would be. I wouldn't be the person that I am. It's such a big part of me. And maybe also a testament that I don't regret any of that is that at the end of the day, the breakup now happened over a year ago, but I'm still in the United Kingdom. And I think early on in the relationship, I always would have thought if it doesn't work out or for whatever reason, I would have probably immediately moved back, because what would I be doing here still? Like, what is here for me until now, living in the United Kingdom? And then when that actually happened, I thought about it and I thought about, well, where do I want to go now? What do I want to do from here? And I knew that if I moved back to the Netherlands, that's where all of my family is, that's where I still have a very big portion of my friends. I like the life in the Netherlands as well. So I knew I would be happy there probably if I do that. But there was something stopping me. There was something just unsatisfying about it. And I didn't want to just immediately leave this part of my life, this part of who I am behind and go straight back to the Netherlands. And I think there was such a big difference between, that moment and thinking back in the very beginning when I had just moved. And I remember I had gone back home for Christmas and I was going back to the UK and I was at the airport and I was really holding back my tears so much because it was still in the early period where it was quite difficult and I was struggling still. I'd never been homesick before, but I felt so strongly like, don't really want to go because that's not home. And then those years later, actually, the UK has become my home, one of my homes. It has become such a big part of me. Very integrated in the life here. I have a lot of important people here as well. And so I actually wanted to stay. And I think while looking towards the future, we were saying in the very beginning, I'm not really the kind of person that has a 5-year plan. So I don't know if I'm going to stay in the UK forever, or probably not forever. I don't know if I'm going to stay in the UK for the next 5 years or the next year. Maybe I want to move back to the country where I'm from, or maybe I want to get a new experience, or maybe I want to do some more travel. But I'm quite enjoying that all of these options are open, and it's very nice to feel and to experience. But I have made the UK a home for me, because don't right now feel like I want to give up this life. I want to stay here. And it's really made me the person who I am today, and I could never undo that, and I would never want to undo that. So I'm really grateful for the relationship in that sense. Yeah, I wouldn't change any part of it.
Thank you so much. And I think, as mentioned in the beginning, that's your story. I'm happy that you shared your story, that you also were so open-minded and so honest about so many parts that might have been difficult for you in the past, but now you're okay talking about it, because I can only imagine how emotionally it has been in the situation, or in that very moment you had to handle the situation and be clear about your feelings and about your wishes, about your needs. If there's one advice for everyone who's listening or watching right now, what advice would it be? It can be any advice. Doesn't have to be relationship advice. Doesn't have to be, or has to do with intercultural relationships. Can be anything. Anything you would like to share with us.
I think my advice would be a bit similar to what I said before. I really don't want anyone to feel scared off for making that big move or doing that for love. So I would say follow your heart. If it feels right, go for it, take that chance. And in addition to that, maybe advice that would have been good for me to have at the time is to go into it intentionally. So check in with yourself, how you are feeling. And again, you don't need to have a 5-year plan, but if you are in a relationship and you're trying to work out how to overcome the distance or how to spend and arrange your lives together, I think it's so important. I mean, it's a huge cliche, but keep those lines of communication open. You don't have to know how it's going to work out, but I think it's so important to keep talking about it and maybe keep asking yourself, keep checking in with yourself. Then I think maybe it will be easier to feel like you haven't given up all of that control and you don't find yourself in a situation where you feel like you lost yourself. But I would say follow your heart and then check in with your intentionality and talk about it to your loved ones, your friends, and especially to yourself as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time today. Again, for being so open-minded towards the idea of sharing your love story. I don't want to say it didn't have a happy end, because seeing you on the other end, you seem to be pretty happy, if I may say so. So for me, it has an happy end, definitely. And yeah, if it's okay for you, I'm going to link your Instagram account in the side note as well as in the YouTube description. So for everyone who is maybe going through a similar situation as Anna went through, that they can contact you if it's okay for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone and share experiences. Thank you for letting me tell my story, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day as well in Argentina.
Thank you so much for watching and or for listening to today's podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, if you like what I'm doing, please consider to subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Also, if you're listening via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else where this podcast is available, consider to give 5 stars. This is going to help me a long way. If you have any guests I should invite, any suggestions for me, feel free to contact me via Instagram. It's International Love Story. And if you would like to get in contact with me directly, consider writing me an email. It's internationallovestoryypodcast@gmail.com. With this being said, have a wonderful day, have a wonderful afternoon, evening, wherever you are right now, and take care. Bye.